أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرفهم أجمعين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من يومنا هذا إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إن لقتل الحسين حرارة في قلوب المؤمنين لن تبرد أبدا صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear brothers and sisters, dear mu'mineen and mu'minat, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If we were to be gifted the power of flight, if we were able to fly up as birds are able to, and then if we were to be gifted the power to see realities beyond the material world, perhaps if we were to soar up into the sky on a night such as this, it is night, the sky is dark. If we were to fly up into the sky on a night such as this, as long as we look with a material view, certain parts of the world will appear to be well lit and certain parts will appear in darkness. The parts that are well lit are the ones which have abundant electricity supply, a dense population, for example. And those which are in darkness would be areas where either very few people live or people live but they don't get enough electricity to light up their houses and their streets. But if we had been gifted the ability to look beyond the material realm into the spirit world, perhaps the world below us would appear to be very different. Perhaps many places which appear well lit materially may appear as cesspools of darkness. And perhaps some spots on earth which are not so well lit, or which the world counts as being areas of darkness, they may shine forth brightly. Perhaps. And I believe that if we were to do this tonight, then the brightest spot in this city, in this country, may perhaps be this particular location. Because this is where those who love the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam and those who seek to follow them in every aspect of their lives have gathered to remember their trials and sufferings and tribulations. It is now the night preceding the 4th of Muharram, and if we go back to the year 61 Hijri, on a night such as this, the day preceding this, Imam Hussain alayhi salam and his companions, his family members, his followers, they are on the hot, dusty plains of Karbala pursuing their mission. As we know, Imam Hussain alayhi salam is in Karbala on a civilizational mission, on a lofty civilization, a mission whose worth and value is no less than the worth and value of humanity itself. It may look like a small camp in a dusty desert, but what we see is one aspect or chapter of a long story of this civilizational mission being pursued. However, Imam Hussain is no stranger to participating in this mission. It's something he's been doing from his youth. He's been doing it from his youth. This civilizational mission works something like this. This mission, this movement has a leader, has a commander, has a wali, the markaz and center of wilaya. And then it has followers who, based on their ma'rifah and iman and their willingness to sacrifice, are placed at different positions relative to this markaz of wilaya and leadership. Some are very close because their ma'rifah and their iman and their eagerness and readiness to serve is greater, and some are further away from him. And when I talk about being close and further away, this is not a physical closeness, but spiritual closeness. It works like this. The Imam, the leader of this movement, decides priorities, and his followers act upon these priorities based on the opportunities and circumstances that are available to them. And Imam Hussain has been part of this system for a long time. There was a time when his father, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, when his father was the leader of this movement and the center of this civilizational mission, and at that time, Imam Hussain alayhi salam was one of the closest companions. He was his son, but in addition to being his son, he was one of the closest followers and companions of the leader of his time. And for example, we have narration speaking of the important role that Imam Hussain and Imam Hassan, of course, they played in the battles during the time of Imam Ali's Khilafah. For example, the Battle of Jamal, which was next to Basra. And for example, the Battle of Siffin, a battle which was fought on the banks of the upper Euphrates River. Today that area falls in Syria. The Battle of Siffin was an enormously important battle and a terribly long drawn battle. It is said it lasted more than a year. Of course, this doesn't mean that they were continuously fighting for a year. They would fight, there would be pauses, then they would fight again, negotiations, and so on and so forth. And during these difficult times, Imam Hussain was one of the closest companions and followers of his leader. A little further down the line, when the leadership, the mantle of leadership and wilaya falls upon Imam Hassan alayhi salam, once again Imam Hussain plays a critical role in taking this civilizational mission forward. Dear Mu'mineen, Imam Hassan's period of imamat and leadership was an extremely critical one. We've heard of the peace agreement that was signed between Imam Hassan and Muawiyah. And we've heard that as a result of this agreement, the position of Khilafah, temporal power, worldly power and position was handed over to Muawiyah. And Imam Hassan retired to Medina to spend the rest of his life there till the end of his earthly life, which lasted another 10 years. It appears to be a period of quietude, a period in which Imam Hassan and the Alawi movement and the genuine Islamic movement, they seem to have taken a step back, taken a step towards the sidelines. But when we go and look into the details of this period, it is a period of intense activity. It is a period of intense activity. There isn't a moment to waste or spare during these 10 years of Imam Hassan's Imamat. What is Imam Hassan doing? On the face of it, he's in Medina. He used to be the Khalifa, the leader of the entire Muslim Ummah. He succeeded Imam Ali upon Imam Ali's assassination. But suddenly he's now living in a small part and quarter of the small city of Medina. Medina's importance has reduced as the center of power has shifted north towards Iraq and towards Syria. And on the face of it, he seems to be praying. He seems to be tending to his fields and his personal affairs and assets, meeting a few followers and students occasionally. That seems to be what's happening on the face of it. A nice, holy man leading a retired life in the closing years of his life. But when we get into the details, we see this is a period of intense activity. This is the period in which Imam Hassan, through Imam Hassan, this civilizational movement is rapidly shifted from the military and political plane to the cultural and community plane. It is a time of intense community building. Many of the individuals who later on shine in Islamic history, including many of the names that shine in Karbala, these are individuals who have been trained and taught and developed during these 10 years by Imam Hassan, including Habib bin Mazahir, whose name was mentioned a few minutes ago, including him. This is a period when the controlling authority of the time, the ruler who claims to be the successor of the Holy Prophet, this ruler has declared the narration of hadith, the recounting of stories and incidents related to Rasulullah, he has declared it to be illegal. It is a crime. And in this way, these rulers hope that they will strike a death blow to this civilizational movement. Because as we all know, the Quran requires tafsir, requires exegesis, explanation. And the true source of tafsir and the best source of tafsir are these ahadith. But the government of the time has banned. The ruler who says, I am the follower of Rasulullah, says, you are not allowed to say, Qala Rasulullah. And this ban is being enforced over the Muslim world. But Imam Hussein and his select group of students and lovers and followers are making sure that they keep a record. They are writing ahadith. They are teaching ahadith to each other. They are spreading these little collections of ahadith across the Muslim lands in an underground way. There is intense activity happening during this time. Perhaps someone may ask the question, is this phase of intense activity, was this phase of intense activity successful? Wasn't Imam Hassan assassinated, martyred 10 years later after this period began? And wasn't it the case that the usurping ruler continued to rule for another 10 years after the martyrdom of Imam Hassan, and then died while declaring Yazid to be his successor? So if someone asks the question that, was all this activity really successful? Dear Mu'mineen or Mu'minat, this martyrdom of Imam Hassan alayhi salam is perhaps in itself one of the strongest arguments in favor of proving that it was successful. It was successful. Why would a tyrant who depends on legitimacy and a degree of popularity in the Muslim public risk martyring somebody who is looked upon favorably by the Muslim masses? He is the grandson of the Holy Prophet. He is generally well loved in the Muslim masses. They may not follow him, but they like him. They love him. They see him as a nice person, as a great scholar, as a holy man. But despite that, we see him being shadowed by spies for the entire period of 10 years, and then finally martyred. And that too martyred through such a convoluted route. Why not just send an assassin to kill him? Why instigate somebody in his own household to do this so that it can't be caught out easily later on? It took an enormous amount of effort to assassinate and martyr Imam Hassan alayhi salam. And this martyrdom itself and the way in which it was carried out is in itself one of the strongest arguments, and there are many other arguments, that shows that this period of intense activity was extremely important, extremely successful. And when this period ends with the martyrdom of Imam Hassan, now Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam, he finds himself as the leader of this civilizational movement and mission. As-salawat bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. May I request, I can see there are a lot of people who are coming. Please come forward a little bit further so that it is easier for those who arrive later. Please recite another salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ali wa ajil faraj. Now Imam Hussain finds himself in this position where he himself is the leader of this civilizational movement. And now, rather than following the direction set by somebody else who's the leader, he himself holds this blessed and important post of wilaya in this movement. And he judges now that with the arrival of Yazid, we need to take a different approach, and that's what he sets out to do. He realizes that what this ummah needs is islah and reformation. I see a lot of new faces today, so I'll just take a couple of minutes to repeat a couple of points. He realizes that what this movement needs, what this ummah needs, is islah and reformation. And this islah and reformation is required so that this ummah can play its correct Qur'ani, Ilahi and Islami role, that of being khayra ummatin. The ummah that leads, rescues, emancipates all of humanity. For that it needs reform. And we will speak about reform a little later, a few minutes from now, inshallah. And he realizes that for this reform to occur, for islahe ummati jaddi, he needs to take some decisive and distinctive action. He needs to do something different. It's not going to happen simply by asking people to reform themselves. Things have gotten really bad. The ummah has fallen into a filthy cesspool of values which have more to do with the age of Jahiliyyah than with Islam. And we've spoken about that in the preceding nights as well. It won't be easy to reform an ummah which has fallen to this extent. And that is why Imam Hussain understands that he must do something different. He must reject the demand for bay'ah. He must set out boldly and openly, leaving Medina for Makkah. He must set camp in Makkah. And as the thousands and thousands of Muslimin and Hujjaj gather from all the Muslim lands in Makkah, he must make sure he meets each and every group and explains to them and tells them what he's doing. And then he realizes that when the call comes from Kufa, and it seems to be a genuine call, he must accept their invitation and go towards Kufa. And he does that. And when he knows that when he is blocked from reaching Kufa, he must now find some other way to continue this movement of reform and reformation and Islah alive. And he heads out towards Karbala. And Imam Hussain realizes, dear brothers and sisters, that the movement of Islah-e Ummat must continue even after his martyrdom. And which is why Imam Hussain plays an important role in the pitching of the tent of Shahada. We've spoken about the tent yesterday. We compared tents to houses, and we said that one of the appropriate descriptions of these gatherings and these events of Azza is to describe them as efforts to pitch the tent of Azza. A tent, in contrast to a house, signifies movement. A tent signifies purpose. A tent signifies collectivity and brotherhood. A tent signifies stages of progress and improvement. A tent is open, far more open than a house is to others. And that's what the tent of Azza and Hussainism is, open to all of humanity. And the tent has thus been pitched, the tent of Azza has been pitched just as Imam Hussain sought Islah-e Ummat in his life. He continues to seek Islah-e Ummat after his martyrdom, primarily through tents such as this and through mu'mineen and mu'minat such as us who play a role in pitching this tent. And I insist, a person who in this tent, everyone is a part of the group who pitches this tent, even if he or she is to turn up for a single night. Even if, yes, some play a greater role and some play a lesser role, but the simple act of turning up for these gatherings in itself is a small contribution and step forward in pitching this tent and keeping this movement alive. This is the tent of Islah-e Ummat, dear Mu'mineen wa Mu'minat. And since we are speaking of Islah and reform, allow me to take this opportunity to clarify a point. Islah of the Ummat, reform in Muslim society, is a topic which seems to be the flavor of the day for as long as we can remember. For as long as I can remember at least, they've been writing and speaking about the need for reform in Muslim society. Books are published with this title, articles are written, furious television debates are held on this topic, seminars are held. Everybody seems to be worried about the need for reform in Muslim society. And when I say everybody, I mean everybody, Muslims and non-Muslims included. Many of these calls for reform in Muslim society also seem to say, some imply and some say it clearly, that Muslims have a problem with reform. Muslims, they have a problem with reform. They seem to be, it's one of their terms, conservative in their outlook. They don't want to change. The world has moved ahead. We are in the age of, this is the modern age, this is the age of falan and this technology, that technology. But the Muslims want to live in the past. They want to live 1400 years in the past. Muslims seem to have a problem with reform, and that is why, do you know, that's why Muslim society is plagued by all these problems. They are poor, They're uneducated. They fight among themselves. Civil wars, poverty, monarchies, dictators, corrupt politicians. They need to reform. Muslims need to reform. And then some go on to say that if they are not capable of reforming themselves, perhaps reform should be forced upon them. So, reform and Muslims, reform and Islam is a topic that seems to be evergreen. Everyone has something to say about it. Everyone has something to say about it. And here we are on this night of the 4th of Muharram, repeatedly hearing that Imam Hussain said, "Innama kharajtu li talabil islah fi ummati jatti." So there we see reform being the fundamental motivation and driver for the Hussaini movement, the Islamic movement as well. How do we square all this together? It seems to all be a muddle. Now, of course, to clarify all the aspects of this discussion would require several lectures, and we are not here to conduct lectures, especially not on a particular topic such as this. I will just take a couple of minutes to touch upon and shed light upon one aspect of this discussion, in the hope that those who are interested in pursuing it further will read up further about it and have further discussions on this topic. Dear brothers and sisters, when we speak of reform and Islah, we know that reform and Islah is like going and coming. You cannot speak of somebody returning, let me say going and returning. You cannot speak of somebody returning unless that person has gone in the first place, right? You can't speak of somebody waking up unless that person has fallen asleep in the first place. They work as binaries. Reform in Islam also has a binary. There's another side of the same coin. You cannot have Islah and you cannot have reform unless something has gone bad, something has become defective. Without that, it's senseless to speak of Islah and reform. So when we speak about reform and Muslims, reform and Islam, we can quickly run through a menu and see where it is sensible to speak of reform and where it doesn't make sense to speak of reform. Because reform comes with a presupposition, that of something having gone bad or defective or decayed or deviant. All right? If you're going to talk about reform, people say the Quran needs reform. The Quran needs reform. They say there are these verses in the Quran, they are such and they are such and they are very unpleasant, and we need to remove certain verses from the Quran. You can look it up on the internet. There are people who say this and write this, including some who claim to be Muslims. Now this is an option for reform that in the Hussaini view of reform is meaningless. Because the Hussaini view of reform is aware of this Qurani ayat which says, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikr wa inna lahu lahafidhun." The Almighty has clearly stated, we have sent down the Quran and we are its protectors. And it is really a mu'jiza that the Quran today is the same as it was 1400 years ago. There isn't a single book which has managed to stay unchanged even for 100 years, let alone 1400 years. Inna lahu lahafidhun. It's meaningless to speak of reform in the Quran. All right, so let's leave that aside. Let's not go for reform in the Quran. Let's go for reform in the Hadith. Now, if reform in the Hadith means seeking a source of Hadith and tafsir of Quran which is different from the Ahlul Bayt, putting them aside, placing them on the side, and seeking authority and power and tafsir and explanation and leadership from any other location other than the Ahl Bayt, once again, that doesn't make sense in the Husseini paradigm of reform. Because innama waliyakumullahu wa rasul walladina amanu alladina yuqimuna salat wa yu'tuna zakat wa hum raki'un. These are ayat that we are all familiar with. The Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam have been designated as the unquestionable centers of authority and vilayat in the Husseini paradigm. And therefore reform in this aspect too is meaningless. What about reform in terms of understanding what the Quran wants from us? Upgrading our understanding of what the Quran wants from us, what the Ahlul Bayt want from us. This is a reform that has no conflict with the Husseini paradigm. In fact, it is the Husseini paradigm. What about understanding how to apply Islam in our lives? How to apply Islam in Pakistan may be different from how to apply Islam in Singapore. Yes, it may be. How to apply Islam and follow Islam in a period of power, in a period where the Islamic movement faces fewer difficulties, may be very different from a time and a place where it faces greater difficulties. So if reform is required in our understanding of Islam or in our understanding of how to act upon Islam, it does not conflict with the Husseini demand for Islah fi Ummati Jaddi. In fact, I would go forward and say it is exactly the Husseini demand for Islah in Ummati Jaddi. And here, most of us here who are present today take pride in being associated with the Shia segment of the Muslim Ummah. And truly it is a matter of pride for us to be associated with this segment of the Ummah. One of the aspects that we can rightfully take pride in is that more than any other section or segment of the Ummah, in fact I believe we are alone and exclusive in this, the Shia section of the Ummah has kept alive a concept known as ijtihad. Many of you have heard it. I will not try to translate it because it won't work in translation, but I will simply explain it. Ijtihad is a complex, well-developed model, intellectual model, of deriving constantly improved and updated answers from the Islamic sources, from the Quran, from the sayings of the Ahlul Bayt, from the actions and the reports about what they have done. And it is a matter of intense pride for us as Shia that more than anyone else, and perhaps exclusively so, we are the ones who have held aloft the flag of ijtihad. And therefore reform for us and through us for all of the Ummah is something which is far more possible for the Shia than it is for any other segment of the Ummah. And as you know, this additional benefit, privilege, power brings along with it commensurate responsibility as well with regards to other segments of the Ummah. I'll come back to my discussion of Karbala in a minute. So it is this ijtihad which makes sense with the Husseini paradigm of reform. When those who say, I mentioned there are those who say that Muslims have a problem with reform. Muslims have a problem with reform. They are conservative. Now these words, conservative, progressive, liberal, these are all their words. I don't want to get into what they mean. These are not words from our lexicon and from our civilization. But they are words that are used for us. And in light of this brief discussion that we've just had, perhaps we can explain to them that Muslims don't have a problem with reform. What Muslims have a problem with is senseless reform. What Muslims have a problem is with calling any change reform. What Muslims have a problem with is fundamentally stupidity. We believe in reform, but logical reform, well-structured reform, reform that makes sense, reform that is defined by the Husseini paradigm of reform. Please recite a salawat bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah. Ya Alim. Dear brothers and sisters, time is racing by. This tent is the tent of Islahi Ummah. This tent is the tent of Islahi Ummah. And naturally, the best place to begin the Islah of Ummah is to begin it with ourselves. Aren't we a part of this Ummah? So put it another way, this tent is also the tent of our own Islah. Our own Islah, so that we can be with Imam Hussein in this movement, in this civilizational movement, inshallah. And when we want to be with Imam Hussein in this civilizational movement, we need to take stock of what could be holding us back. Why is it that we are not with Imam Hussein, or at least not as close to Imam Hussein as we ought to be? And there could be several reasons for this. But one of the reasons, dear brothers and sisters, is that the center of this movement, the markaz of Wilaya, the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, Imam Hussein and all the other Imams and the Ahlul Bayt, they are nothing but purity and goodness. إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ. God has willed that any and all impurity shall stay away from you. Now, dear Mu'mineen and Mu'minat, when I am speaking of myself, I am wallowing in so much sin and disobedience and filth, when I am not able to control my eyes, for example, I find myself saying things that hurt other mu'mineen. When I find myself being jealous, covetous, greedy, when I can't be sure that what I'm earning, my sources of income are truly halal, obviously I can't really expect to be very close to the center of purity and wilaya in this movement. Dear brothers and sisters, our sins and our disobedience, and I'll be the first one to admit that I'm very much a part of this problem. They are a major problem that prevent us. They're a barrier that seem to be preventing us from discharging our true role in this. But alhamdulillah, with this tent being the center of Islahi Ummah, this tent of Azhar itself provides us plenty of opportunity to perform tawbah and cleanse ourselves. When we cry, dear brothers and sisters, when we cry over the grief, over the tribulations of Imam Hussein, let's make sure that at that moment when we manage to establish a connection, a special connection with Imam Hussein, let's make sure that we ask him to help us get out of whatever sin or filth that we may be involved in. Everybody knows his own condition, himself or herself. Let's make sure we use this opportunity. And let me just narrate a very small incident in a couple of minutes. This pertains to about 50 years ago. There is a famous incident a personality who lived in the city of Tehran. Perhaps some of you have heard about him. This is before the Islamic Revolution, about 50 or 60 years ago. There was a man called Rasul Turk. He was a gangster. And he used to do whatever gangsters do. But he had two special qualities. One is that he was particular about attending these gatherings respectfully. And of course, another quality was that he made sure that he would always be respectful towards the Sadat. How would he attend these gatherings? It was famous. He was always drunk. What would he do? What was his way of showing respect? Before turning up for this gathering, he would not drink for a couple of hours. And then, while coming in, he would stop at the bathroom on the way out and gargle with water. And to his mind, this was, getting ready for participating in Majalis-e-Hussaini. And he would come and he would participate in these gatherings. And when the Musibah would be recited and the Noha would be recited, he would cry like a baby. This was all terribly embarrassing for the other Mu'mineen. This is a known gangster. He had picked a certain Hussainiya and he would always turn up there. The other Mu'mineen were holding their heads in their hands. They had become infamous as the Hussainiya of Rasul-e-Turk, the famous gangster. Now it's not easy to tell Rasul-e-Turk, don't come. But somehow one of them mustered up the courage. And he stopped Rasul-Turk. Stopped Rasul. It was the 9th of Muharram, Shab-e-Ashur. He stopped him at the door and said, we've all had a meeting. We've all decided. I've been given this responsibility to tell you that you need to stop coming here. Rasul-Turk looks around, sees that everybody else is standing behind him in support, puts his head down and goes home. The next morning he wakes up. This is the morning of Ashura. He wakes up because somebody is knocking at his door early in the morning, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. He opens the door and he sees it's the same gentleman who had ordered him out of the Hussainiya the previous night. So he asked him, what happened? He said that you need to come with me back to the Hussainiya and join everything that we do for Ashura. Rasul-Turk is confused. What happened? He says that, this is a very famous incident. He says that last night, after we had thrown you out and finished our azadari, and I went home and I slept, I found myself while dreaming, while sleeping, on the plains of Karbala. And it was the 10th of Muharram that year. I was electrified. I'm in Karbala. I can see the Yazidi army on that side and Hussein's camp on this side. And I started running towards Hussein's camp so I could be a part of it. As I came close to Hussein's tent, I could sense that there is a dog there guarding that tent. But I paid no attention to him. And I charged towards the tent, and this dog jumped at me and attacked me. And it was a dog, but it had your face on it. Rasul, it had your face on it. Rasul-e-Turk breaks down. He breaks down. He is crying like a baby, more passionately than he has ever done so in his life. And he's saying, oh Hussein, if only I knew that you had accepted me as your dog, I would have given up all this filth a long time back. The knowledge that Imam Hussein has a place for Rasul. Imam Hussein cares for him, loves him, despite all that he has done, transforms him. And this transformation is very important. Let it not be misunderstood that we can do whatever we want and we can still be Hussaini. No, the transformation is the main point in this story. And from that moment onwards, Rasul-e-Turk had nothing to do with either alcohol or any of the other criminal activities that he would engage in. And in fact, he became such such an azadar, that he became the main highlight and attraction of that Husainiya. Crowds would gather to take part in Azadari in that Husainiya because Rasul Turk was a part of it. This is the transformation. His grave is in Tehran. It is a minor ziyaratgah in itself right now. The transformation, the power of change that this Husseini mission, Husseinism, this civilizational mission has is enormous. It can change people. It can change people when it can change people like Rasul Turk. Why can't it change people like you and I? Why can't it transform us entirely? Islah-e Ummat. This is what this tent has been pitched for. And Islah-e Ummat begins with ourselves. And one of the most important areas where we need Islah is to increase the distance between us and sin and gunah and ma'asiyah. The transformational power of the Husseini mission can also be seen in the life of Hazrat Habib bin Mudahir. Hazrat Habib, dear brothers and sisters, was a special companion. He used to live in Medina. He was about the same age as Imam Hussein, and they were childhood friends. Stayed in Medina and stayed with this family all through his life. He was about the same age as Imam Hussein. In the later years of his life, he had shifted to Kufa, probably along with Imam Ali, when Imam Ali set up base in Kufa during the years of his Khilafah. And after the martyrdom of Imam Ali, continued to stay in Kufa. Imam Hussein's camp has been set up in Karbala. Kufa is in a very tense situation. Very little news is available in Kufa. The people of Kufa, of course, know that Hazrat Muslim has been martyred. And they know that Hussein is supposed to come here to Kufa. But they don't really know what's happening. Is he coming? When is he coming? They don't know that he's been redirected towards Karbala. And it is at that time when there is a knock at Habib's door. He asks who it is. Who is it? And he is told that, Ana Baridul Hussein, I am Hussein's messenger. He rushes, opens the door. The messenger hands him a letter. The letter has been sent apparently from Karbala. And it says, Min al-Hussein ibn Ali ila al-Rajul al-Faqih Habib bin Mudahir. This is a letter from Hussein to a man of deep knowledge and understanding, Faqih, Habib bin Mudahir. You know about our position in Islam. You know about our station. You know about our relationship to the Holy Messenger. I now command you to pay your dues and expend everything that you have for us and in our cause. Very brief letter. Hazrat Habib was confused till then because information wasn't enough. He didn't know what he needed to do. He knew something big is probably going to happen, but because he didn't have information, he was in Kufa. But the moment he gets this letter, he asks the messenger where this is from. He tells him Karbala, etc. And he now sets off for Karbala. When he arrives in Karbala, it is said it was the 7th of Muharram when he arrives in Karbala. For the first time in all these days, there is a wave of joy that runs through the Husseini camp. There is shouting, there is welcoming, there is laughter. And Hazrat Habib, just one old man, is brought in the presence of Imam Hussein. They greet each other. And then Hazrat Habib plays a very important role in preparing for the battle which is about to come. It is said that on the night of Ashura, Hazrat Zainab came out and asked her brother, "Oh my brother, are you sure that these companions will pass their test tomorrow? It's going to be very difficult tomorrow. Are you sure they will stay true to their test, to their faith, to their vows? Word of this reaches Hazrat Habib. Word of this reaches Hazrat Habib. And we see Hazrat Habib standing outside the tent of Sayyida Zainab, calling out to the lady and telling her, "Oh my lady, if you command us, we will offer you our heads right now." Sayyida Zainab is reassured by this display of confidence. The next morning, when it is the time when battle has begun in the morning, and it is now the time for Dhuhr, at this time, Hazrat Habib calls out to the Yazidi army and says, "It is time for the Zuhr prayer. Let's stop battle and let's pray." And the reply that he gets from the other side is, "O unbeliever, do you think that your prayer will be accepted? Do you think that Hussein's prayer will be accepted?" La hawla wa la quwwata. Habib can't take this anymore. He replies, "Oh fool, oh ahmaq, you think that your prayer will be accepted and the prayer of the grandson of the Holy Prophet will not be accepted." And he tells Hussein, "I can't take this anymore. Please give me permission to go out for battle right away." And he gets his permission. It is said he was one of the earlier ashab to go out for battle. Hazrat Habib goes out to battle, engages the enemy in fierce battle and fierce combat, slaughters a number of them, but then of course is overcome. And as he falls from his horse, he calls out, "Oh my Imam, please come to my aid. Oh my Imam, please help me." It is said that Imam Hussein arrived at his side, and that's when Hazrat Habib passed away. The enemy, after that, after the events of Karbala were over, of course, beheaded Hazrat Habib. Like all the other men, his head too was placed atop a lance, a spear. And the first place that it was paraded in was Kufa itself. So you have the caravan entering Kufa with all these women, these children, and between them these spears, each of them with a head on it. Terrifying. And in that situation, it is narrated that Lady Zainab is seen asking around for something. Somebody comes to her and says, "My dear lady, what are you looking for?" She says, "I am looking for Habib's widow." "Why are you looking for Habib's widow?" "She stays here in Kufa." "Yes, she does." "Why are you looking for her?" She says, "I want to offer my condolences to her. I want to thank her and commend her for her support to her husband. Her husband was very loyal to us. I want to lessen her grief at seeing her husband's head being paraded through the markets of Kufa." Oh, Sayyida said, "You are in Kufa and you are worried about Habib's wife. What about your own brother? What about your own brothers? What about your own sons? The heads of the family of the Prophet are being paraded through the streets of Kufa, and all that the Kufans can say is to whistle and jeer and to throw stones at you." La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyil azim. سيعلم الذين يظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.